One of the things that we've spoke about previously, and every Thursday I do a mental health kind of podcast, is especially at the moment, and especially with blokes, we're not often great at talking about stuff that we're going through. And previous guests, I've had Alex, I've had Steve, I've had a few others, Aidan, have all talked about stuff that they've kind of been through, and especially with the pandemic, it was a really tough time for a lot of people where, you're suddenly locked away, you're in your flat, and there's no interaction with people, and you're told not to go outside. And you wrote a really great article, I think it was in March 2020, if my memory is right.
Yeah.
And it was just, are you happy to almost share some of your story and what you went through
Yeah.
and talk around that?
Yeah, I mean, how long you got? So yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Like I said, I think it's something important that more men should start talking about. And I'm not one who's comfortable necessarily talking about it, even though I did write that article. But I think most men, in particular, are not very good at talking about it. Also, not very good at spotting signs that they're struggling. I was overconfident probably in the start of my career. Like I was on a bit of a roll, take on as much as I possibly could. So be working full time in an agency. I'd come back in, I'd freelance, right? I'd be watching the most engrossing thing I could find on Netflix and playing Football Manager at the same time. So I'd be doing all that and just being like, okay, everything's normal. This is like a normal thing to be doing. And then, so I couldn't be alone with my thoughts or anything like that. I had to be plugged into something constantly. And then I set up a business and I had ridiculously high expectations. So my plan was, I'm from a poor background, my dad might need care, all that sort of stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm going to set up a business. It's going to go really well. I'm going to be financially stable. I'm going to be able to look after my parents, solve more problems. I'm going to also be able to see the world and have family of my own, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to do this and it's going to go really well. And it didn't. So I was struggling. It wasn't meeting my expectations at all. I had really, like I said, big expectations for it. I had to learn to be by myself. So I was working by myself in an office for the first time. I was running out of money, all that sort of stuff. So little things started happening that were like, no, I'd never been nervous before doing anything, never been nervous in a pitch or a client meeting or anything. Started feeling a bit sick in client meetings and before it. So I never had that before where I was like, I feel a bit like not great in this pitch and stuff. And then I was putting myself under a lot of pressure, obviously, if I had high expectations. So every time I went to one of these things, I was like, you need to win this. Like you need to be able to do this. It started getting worse and worse. So physically worse and worse, started feeling more sick, like sweating loads, all that sort of stuff. Basically, my body was just telling me to get help and sort myself out. And I wasn't listening. I was carried on. One point I had to walk out for my own business. The last one I did, I had to walk out of the room. I couldn't speak. So I just couldn't speak anymore. Felt like I was going to be sick. I had to walk out of the room. So I waited a good 18 months before doing it after that incident. So I was in a senior job within an agency. I was just cracking on like normal. It was hell, really. Like I couldn't go anywhere. I'd had a couple of anxiety attacks, which I never had before. And then realized I did have them when I was a kid. And I just thought they were asthma attacks and that sort of stuff. So getting worse and worse. I was just carrying on like normal. And then I was like, one day I phoned, I think it's IAPS, which is like the mental health place in Sheffield or whatever. And I was like, I think I'm stuck. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get home today. I'm in like Leeds. I can't get on a train, can't do anything. And they were like, okay, cool. It's 11-month wait to see someone. I was like, so we always leave stuff too late. And I was like, okay, so I need to plan 11 months ahead for this. It nearly happened again. I got stuck in Warsaw after a holiday. Like I was flying by myself. So fast forward, I'd kind of paused my own business and I was doing this. And then, so I got started to get CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, and that was the first step I took. And I was lucky enough to go private because I couldn't wait 11 months. I had to do it basically, really against that as well. Like I wasn't the sort of person to be like, yes, I'm going to get a therapist. And I started getting a bit better. So I started getting a bit better, and then we had a lockdown, which obviously was bad, and everything else to do with COVID was bad. But I really needed it. Like it gave me time to be able to kind of reset and not be put into these situations that would trigger, physical responses all the time. I could do meetings over calls. I could do loads of stuff. I could fit in loads of stuff in the day. So it started, and I was, a perfectly very relaxed person. Went to a high state of anxiety for a number of years, really, without really realizing it. Plugged myself. I was at an agency that was growing really fast at the time. Plugged myself in. I was like, okay, I can just do this, and I was getting better. I felt useful again. I didn't feel very useful in my skill sets before that, but things were going well again. So I was like, okay, going well again. Plugged myself in completely, like sort of overworked myself because I wanted to at the time, and it was great, and I was having fun. I think then I went from the heightened state to a lower state, and I was watching the Euros, the men's Euros final against, I think it was Italy, wasn't it, in the Euros. And I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't feel. So this is a couple of years after, being an incredibly anxious person to feeling quite normal again. And I was getting no enjoyment from watching the finals, and that would usually be like a heightened state of emotion for me. And like, I'd actually enjoy watching it. I wasn't getting any enjoyment from it. And then I went from a state of high anxiety to being like, I didn't have any emotions for about 6 months, I don't think. So nothing like at all. So I've seen sort of both aspects of that spectrum over the past sort of 4 or 5 years now. And you can only really discuss it now retrospectively, looking back on it as a thing that happened, because at the time you don't really know. Like, I didn't really know that I wasn't having emotions and stuff. So yeah, I think that was been my kind of journey until now, and I'm in a far better place from going through that. And I think it was always going to happen. So it was always going to happen with me. It's always been there. It was just a case of when it was going to break, and I'm quite glad it has happened now, because it means you can have more conversations with people. It means you're more empathetic. Means you can spot things. So I'll be like, okay, that situation is going to make me anxious, or that sort of thing. I can understand it a lot more, understand my body a lot more, understand my head a lot more. So at the time, it's been hell like for a bit, going through those kind of things. And I'm sure there's lots of people who have had similar situations and in far worse positions as well. I think it needs to become a normal thing to talk about. Definitely.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think I know for a fact, because I know what blokes are like, is that, I'm not great myself to talk to people, even though I talk to people all the time, but about certain things that are actually kind of upsetting me. But we will listen. And especially if it's people that we've seen around and we kind of respect or whatever, the openness for people. And what's really interesting is that people from the army and all different kind of backgrounds all have different stories to tell. And they're all equally valid. And it's just, there is no normal, if that makes sense. And it's just, and thank you for honestly kind of sharing. What did you find really kind of helped you, things improve?
I took little steps at the start. So I started meditating, which again, a sentence that 21-year-old me would be not on board with at all. So I started doing that, and after a while, got into it, and that was like, okay, I can sort of clear my head a little bit. I learned some coping techniques, or I can't really remember them, from CBT and stuff like that, but things like that at the time when I was in those situations, that they helped me get through like what would have been a panic attack or whatever. So I did little things for myself, real basic stuff, like I wasn't looking after myself, so I'm not going to feel good. I started exercising a lot more. When I was going through the period of, my balance was completely off. Like I started going to the gym at every lunchtime, eating healthy, drinking less, all that sort of stuff. It sounds stupid, but like, you've got to do those basics if you're going to get anywhere near feeling better. And also, seeking help in a therapist as well, like, really, really useful for me. And that's probably the first time I spoke about stuff. So I think those things, you got to do stuff off your own back a little bit, and you've also got to want to get better, and really kind of like work towards it. But then also just seeking help, like, it's sometimes one of the only ways you're going to be able to get better.
Yeah, but no, thank you for that, because I think what's interesting is, especially with, when you see business stuff and it's always work hard, play hard, whatever.
Yeah.
One of the best things that ever happened to me was when I was, 10, 15 years ago doing my PhD, and it was my first business. So I was doing the PhD in the daytime and the business at night. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, would force me to go to bed at a reasonable time, because the behaviors that are sometimes celebrated, get no sleep and work hard and, exercise too much and eat what you want and just smoke and whatever. Yeah. And it does build up over time, that sometimes it might seem a bit dull to get your sleep in, get your water in, do whatever you need to do. But it makes a big difference. And it was great to kind of hear that as well.
Yeah, really basic stuff. And also, if I was a millionaire, I'd tell people not to sleep and stuff all the time, give them really bad advice.